Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching our special live coverage of the latest regarding the Russian-Ukrainian file. Events are accelerating on the ground and at the international levels with in-depth discussions with our panel of guests. Via Skype, we have Dr. Hamud Salhi, Associate Dean Professor. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Hamud Salhi, and Farquham Bank, Founder, CEO of Strategic Pan-Indo-Pacific Arena. Thank you, Dr. Kim, for joining our special talk show. The discussion and the live coverage continue right after this break. Before we delve into discussion, let me, dear viewers and our honored guests, to share with you the latest updates regarding the Russian-Ukrainian file. First, the latest development regarding the Russian strikes have hit Dnipro city. In addition, one person was killed in the strikes shelling recently, and the Russian forces approached Kyiv. It seems that the humanitarian corridor to be opened from the city of Mariupol hasn't reached a definite solution, and UN says more than 2.5 million people have fled Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Defense declared that its troops had targeted the airports of the city of Luhansk and Ivano-Frankivsk in western Ukraine. Let's have a listen.
On the morning of March 11, high-precision long-range weapons targeted Ukrainian military infrastructure. The military airfields at Luhansk and Ivano-Frankivsk have been decommissioned.
Let me begin with you, Dr. Hamud Salhi, examining the historical roots of the Russian military operation in Ukraine and assessing where the situation stands after 2 weeks of fighting. It's clear that the West's tough financial sanctions is it nudging Moscow toward a quick resolution and away from its preset goals. Mr. Hamud Salhi, what can we understand from this? Does Putin really want to reclaim Ukraine, as some experts say, for a mix of historical reasons and primarily because of Ukraine's success as an independent nation and its desire to move closer politically and culturally to the West? And is this special military operation, as Russia prefers to call it, means Putin is trying to rebuild the Soviet Union?
There are a lot of things to consider. One, when we hear what the Russian foreign minister said after the meeting with the Ukrainian that was moderated by Turkey, it was clear that the Russians want guarantees, the demilitarization of the Ukraine and security that would protect their national interest. These are set goals that the Russians want to achieve, meaning that if we were to reach a ceasefire or an end to these hostilities, the Russians want to get those guarantees. Short of that, they will continue pushing for what they see as serving their best interest. As far as the sanctions and what the Europeans and the Americans have adopted, along with the resolution in the United Nations General Assembly, these are, from their perspective, expected and would not deter them from moving forward and continue to see to it that they get those guarantees. I think one of the main issue for them is to find a government that would take neutrality and that would be understanding, or that would understand the security that the Russians are asking for and adopted. That's another issue that one should look at. But in the meantime, and short of those assurances, the Russians will continue to do what they have been doing so far.
I see. Dr. Farquham Bank, human rights and humanitarian law activist, called Putin's arguments for his incursion, as Mr. Hamud Salhi referred to it earlier, or this incursion in Ukraine, weak and baseless. So, in justifying the Russian assault, Putin has called Ukraine an existential threat and its government a neo-Nazi regime. He has also claimed that ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine were facing genocide. I'd like to know, where do you stand in this, Doctor? Where's the truth amid the insane spread of fake news regarding this file?
Well, first of all, in any conflict or in any war, truth is usually the first casualty of the conflict. That's undeniable, because prior to the onset of the interstate or even any kind of conflict itself, there will be a campaign of disinformation and misinformation in order to trigger what is known by Karl von Clausewitz as the fog of war, so that the other side cannot really understand your true intention and your military ambition. But having said all of that, I've been looking at this conflict very, very carefully. So, for instance, in 1994, just 3 years after Soviet Union collapse, there was a Minsk Agreement 1, where Ukraine decided to surrender 17,000 nuclear warheads to the control of the major republic that inherited what is known as the Commonwealth of Independent States, which only exists all in paper. And that country is, of course, Russia, because Russia is in possession of the veto power in the Permanent UN Security Council. Now, there are several mechanisms in Europe where both Russia and Ukraine sit on. So, for instance, you have the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is OSCE, and that is a platform for any countries, including states in Central Asia or Azerbaijan or Armenia, to have confidence building process based on understanding what kind of weaponry that the other side have, or what kind of military doctrine that is adopted by the relevant countries that you may be suspicious of. So that's one platform. You also have NATO Council with Russia. You have NATO Council with Ukraine. Given the, and I should add that there's also the European Conventional Treaty. Now, given all these mechanisms that are all at work and active, then obviously Russia should not have immediately claimed that NATO would like to expand all the way to its border. Therefore, based on this idea of Russia Mir, which means Russian wolf, therefore Russia has the right to push all the way to the Ukrainian borders on the Ukrainian east. So any argument that says that this is not in violation of the UN Charter or any international humanitarian law are false.
I see. And it seems that Vladimir Putin isn't going to change his mind anytime soon. Just earlier, he announced that his country will soon decide to deploy more troops and military hardware to its western borders in response to NATO's buildup in Eastern Europe. Let's have a listen.
As for the strengthening of the western borders of the Russian Federation, due to the measures taken in this regard by the NATO countries, in response to what they are doing, this must be considered separately, and I ask you to prepare a separate review and a report of the results of the discussion, and we will make the appropriate decisions in the near future.
Back to you, Dr. Hamud Salhi. The fierce pushback from Ukrainians no doubt caught Putin off guard, which means there will be prolonged aggression until a solution is found, even though, the diplomatic efforts each time go without any breakthroughs. What can we expect in the days to come, since Putin doesn't want to change his mind on this operation? And now, as we listened, he's studying the possibility of reinforcing his troops around NATO borders. Can we see this as an important development and an escalation or further escalation to the already complex situation?
This is becoming more of who blinks first. What Russian President Vladimir Putin is saying is that security guarantees are very, very important. This is not a new message for the Russian president, or for that matter, for Russia as a whole. They have been consistent in their message. They have been consistent in saying what exactly they want. And this is specifically, perhaps one could go back to 2006 when the United States and the European somehow invited the Ukraine to be part of NATO and to be part of Europe. What at the root of this is that the Russian president is looking this as something that they need to do in order to protect their security interests. Now, this will continue to escalate from the perspective of the Russian. They know very well that they don't want to get involved or back down in a conflict inside Ukraine the same way they had done back in the 80s in Afghanistan. That is something that they try to avoid. But the main thing for them, and which poses a serious challenge for the United States, for the European, and for Russia, is what to make up of a NATO during at a time when the mission of that NATO was initially designed to be against the former Soviet Union. And since then, since the collapse of the former Soviet Union, the Europeans and the Americans have looked for ways of how to keep these organizations credible and have a purpose. Back in the 90s, for example, the NATO presence was described as linked to the rise of Islamism, the threat, so-called Islamic threat from their perspective, terrorism in general. And then that shifted later on during Barack Obama, when the fight against terrorism was declared as ending. And as a result, we started to see this more inclusion of Russia as a threat to United States national interests. The bottom line for the United States is that without NATO or a European Union that will include Russia runs against its national interest and against the national interest of the United States, the strategic interest, the presence of Russia, the presence of the United States in Europe, will have no meaning. So from that perspective, as it stands today, given the fact that we have had little progress on the diplomatic front, it is likely to see more escalation, particularly on the military front. This is to put pressure on the European and the American to accept what Russia is doing. The other connected point is that sanctions have affected Russia big time, but they are also affecting the Europeans and the Americans, as we have seen in the increase of oil prices, and as we have seen in the latest special meeting that the European Council had, where some serious thought were given as how to proceed with further negotiation. The United States today is considering removal of the Russian special nation status, and the Europeans have done the same thing. But both actions are determined by in the United States by the Congress, and in Europe by consensus of the European Union, meaning that the way the Russians or Vladimir Putin is looking at the conflict, they are looking at it from the perspective of their national interests, and they seem determined to further continue on this escalation, because in the end, they see that the sanctions will have an impact on the European, and that will be sort of the leverage they have at this point.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you indeed for these explanations. Dr. Farquham Bank, can we say now that the best diplomatic efforts will be to persuade perhaps Putin's inner circle and other Russian elites, since he seems determined to continue his preset goals?
Well, I have to say that the question is very precise, and I compliment you on the trust of that question. According to the opposition leader, Alexander Navalny, all the United States or European Union have to do is to sanction 35 individuals or oligarchs that are very close to President Putin. And the names of these 35 oligarchs were laid down in the letter and then published by Wall Street Journal. And the editorial of Wall Street Journal, 2 days after February 24th, if I'm not mistaken, seconded the view of Mr. Navalny that if we hit the 34 oligarchs that are close or in proximity to President Putin, then one of the 35 or few of the 35 may become what Senator Lindsey Graham in the United States called a potential Brutus. In other words, out of that 35, President Putin may be betrayed by one of them or some of them. But there's also another source that says that over the last 22 years, when President Putin has been in power, he has cultivated up to 110 oligarchs altogether. Now, none of these oligarchs enjoy the prospect of being high on the heaven and then coming down to the depths of hell, because all their family members and their fortune are completely disrupted and cut off by the sanctions, and also being put on the targeted list of SWIFT banking, international banking transfer. So they don't enjoy what is going on right now in Ukraine one bit. If anything else, I would say that this is a Putin's war. This is actually not Russia's war against Ukraine. In fact, you will read accounts of Russian troops going into Ukraine, which is considered one of their Slavic brothers, completely dazed, confused, and unsure of their mission altogether. So the likelihood of a betrayal within the inner circle of President Putin is going to be higher and higher and higher by the day, as long as he cannot conquer Kyiv, because he was telling everyone that he can decapitate and take Kyiv and President Volodymyr Zelensky and make everyone in Ukraine surrender and submit to his rule within 3 days, 4 days. Well, we are now coming into the second week of the armed invasion, and
his goals were not met. Yes, thank you, Dr. Kim. Dr. Hamud Salhi, what is your stand on this regarding what Kim has just said? Are we trying to turn Russia against Putin? Are we trying to turn the Russian people against Putin, his inner circle, trying to convince them that what Putin is doing could be catastrophic to the whole country, as many are referring to it, it is Putin's war?
Well, we have to separate the media or the propaganda or what we are now referring to as disinformation. This is part of the propaganda war, and certainly the Americans and the Europeans are correct in looking at the role that the Russian leaders play in Russia. He is the leader. The system in Russia is built around strengthening the power of the presidency. Some call that as an authoritarian form of government. But in the end, when you look at the problem of the challenges that face Putin, is to create a strategy or media strategy that would focus on making this conflict as a Russian conflict. And in that instance, the way the European and the American have treated the Russians, particularly when it comes in security, as stated earlier, there is a sense that the Europeans and the Americans are not comfortable with a strong Russia. More than anything else, when you look at the economic relations that are built between Russia and the European over the years, particularly the relationship that they established with Germany, the Russians have been very careful in adopting a strategy of interdependence, making the European rely on their oil and gas, and also putting a system in place that would guarantee them, again, the main point, security and national recognitions. The bottom line is that do the Russians feel comfortable with a NATO presence along their borders? That is a serious question. From their perspective, what they're saying is that the United States is pushing an agenda that sees Russia as a whole, not just its president, as a destabilizing factor in international relations. They see Russia, they see the United States portraying Russia as a threat to their national interests.
Speaking of which, Dr. Hamud Salhi, let's go now to discuss U.S. allies' position on the matter. Colombian President Duque said that Colombia is a country that has higher hydrocarbon supply capacity than Venezuela, adding that his country could contribute to world energy prices during a press conference held in Washington, D.C., after President Joe Biden announced that the South American country would be given official status as a major non-NATO ally of the U.S. Let's take a listen.
It's also very important to say that Colombia can contribute, and we want to contribute to the world energy prices stability, especially in the circumstances that we are living. But it's very important to say that from the U.S. and Colombia, we continue to call for the restoration of democracy in Venezuela. Y esto que se conoce en inglés como
What is called in English a strategic non-NATO ally makes it possible to bring bilateral relations to the highest level in our history. This is a very important statement, which includes opportunities in terms of trade, in terms of investment, but also, and above all, in terms of security.
To continue with you, Dr. Hamud Salhi, as we have just listened, how would the United States undercut Russian President Vladimir Putin's influence in Latin America by recognizing Colombia, for instance, as a non-NATO ally to the U.S.?
You know, we get into a very strong diplomatic move to isolate further and further Russia. Russia has strong relationships in Latin America, and particularly with Venezuela and Cuba. And reaching out to Colombia fits well with the American response or establishing a deterrent that would undermine Russia's presence in Latin America. It fits very well with the President Biden's approach to addressing this conflict on two fronts, specifically the military front, providing assistance but not getting fully involved or committing American troops on the ground. At the same time, launching a diplomatic initiative to rally the world forces. So it adds to that agenda. It also looking at a new source for providing gas and oil that to lower the prices in the United States and ensure that there is enough in the oil market that would help ease the suffering or the challenges of the Americans and the Europeans are facing. So it's a shrewd move. It's a diplomatic move designed specifically to isolate or to undermine Russia's role in Latin America.
Thank you, Dr. Hamud Salhi. Back to you, Farquham Bank. The Russia-Ukraine conflict came amid Colombia and Venezuela tension. Colombia's defense minister earlier said that Venezuela was moving troops to the country's border with technical assistance from Russia, calling it a foreign interference. Do you think that military equipment given to Venezuela by Russia are the reason behind Colombia condemning the Russian military operation against Ukraine?
I think that cannot be ruled out. That's one of the proximate causes because Maduro, president of Venezuela, has always been under pressure from the opposition. In fact, there is a shadow government in Venezuela who claims that they are the one who are the true representative of the Venezuelan people. But having said all of that, I would agree. First of all, I would concur with what you have just said with the deployment of the armory and weapons and ammunition to the border along Colombia and Venezuela. But I would also say that what is happening right now, that there is a game within a game. What I mean by that is a geopolitical game, because China has made a lot of progress in Latin America over the last 10 years under President Xi Jinping. To a large extent, to China's credit, to be able to slip under the radar of the United States and go into various parts of Latin America to enhance their bilateral trade. And one of the most critical countries is Argentina, that produces the most number of resources that can produce lithium battery that is good for electric vehicle. But then the prices of nickel, which is also a critical component of lithium battery to operationalize the e-vehicle, the price has increased tremendously. It is now $100,000 per ton. And China is aiming at producing up to 40% of e-vehicles for their own domestic consumption with the help of Tesla and even their own manufacturing company in China. Now, if the price of nickel and lithium batteries were to go up, then the country or the policy that would be badly hit is within the context of sustainability and or promoting e-vehicles. The victim would definitely be China.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hamud Salhi, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybkov said that Russia could not rule out deploying military forces to Venezuela and Cuba. Do you think that Colombia is afraid that these troops are meant to attack it, and why?
They have a reason to think that way because of the historical relationship that exists between Venezuela and Colombia, and also is an attempt by the Colombians to also be on the American side. It's getting a bit sort of overwhelming to the world because it's moving in the direction where The sanctions are meant to be global, and the United States is rallying the international forces, all countries, to be on its side. Mm-hmm. A good example of this will be the latest United Nations General Assembly, which was supported by many countries. The vast majority voted for it and to condemn the Russian. But when you look at the subtext, how the resolution was drafted, the terms used in the resolution were meant to create consensus regarding to get the votes. The same thing here. What we're seeing in Latin America is creating a ground for rallying support behind the United States against Russia. But when it comes right to it, when it comes to the implementation, it could be very problematic. The nation states will look at more at their own national interest than anything else. In the case of the latest resolution, it was important to condemn the invasion of another sovereign state, because this is a principle of the United Nations and of international law. But the resolution also was drafted in such a way to leave room for that in that instance. The biggest, for example, we could cite in this perspective is how it described the areas that were under control or supporters of the Russians, Dansk, Luhansk, and that matter. The United Nations General Resolution basically referred to them as certain territories, and then it referred to the resolution according to Minsk. But when we look at the negotiations in Minsk, it posed a very serious questions, namely that those certain territories were at issue, and they were the one that stopped the implementation of the Minsk. But so what we are seeing is that there is this general statement, there is this general observation or support for United States and the European. But when it comes to the implementation, in the end, Colombia will have to look at its own national interest, how this will impact its position in the region, and more than anything else, will the risk of going full force with the United States will help their interests. Yeah. At this point, it's difficult to say that those countries are making those decisions, taking those decisions in mind. They are taking the position of, let's go with the United States, support this, because it's a violation of international law, specifically on the issue of sovereignty, and we'll see how it translates later.
Very nice indeed. Now let's move on to energy sector, which the West claims that Russia is going to use as a pressure card against countries that rely on Russian oil and gas. So let's see which countries rely most on Russian oil and gas. In 2021, Russia was the largest exporter of oil and natural gas to the European Union. 40% of gas consumed in the European Union comes from Russia. Estonia, Poland, Slovakia, and Finland get more than 75% of their petroleum oils from Russia. The largest importers of Russian oil or Russian gas in the European Union are Germany and Italy, with more than 50%. China buys about 27% of Russia's total oil exports, worth $34 billion. North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Moldova takes 100% of their oil from Russia. The Chinese premier said maintaining medium to high speed economic growth for China is a very difficult issue at a press conference marking the end of the annual session of the National People's Congress. He also said that the situation in Ukraine was worrying, but that sanctions against Russia would be detrimental to all parties. Let's follow.
For such a large economy, sustaining economic growth at a medium or a high rate is in itself a very difficult matter. The current situation in Ukraine is indeed worrying. We must do our best to help Russia and Ukraine overcome the difficulties to conduct ceasefire negotiations and to reach peaceful outcome. We support and encourage any effort that might lead to a peaceful resolution of the crisis.
Back to you, Dr. Farquham Bank. Chinese premier said previously that economic sanctions imposed by Western countries on Russia will hurt global economic recovery. In what way do you think these sanctions will cause harm to the global economic recovery?
Oh, definitely. Because if we assume that the global economy is led by two locomotives, that is the United States and China, either way, the two countries will have increase in the prices of their oil and LNG. Now, what former chief economist of President Bill Clinton, if I may recall correctly, Larry Summers, who is not a hawk or hawkish person by any means, when he was interviewed by Fareed Zakaria on GPS, Larry Summers, to my total surprise, he declared that he's not an economist, he's a political economist, and despite being the fact that he was the former president of Harvard University, he argued that if and when United States has to undergo and bite the bullet of inflation, we have to do it in order to defend freedom and democracy. I've never, in all my years, looking at all these prominent individuals, I've never seen an economist who actually, or political economists for that matter, who embrace inflation, who is willing to concede that inflation will happen in the United States because of the increase in the price of oil, but nonetheless, we should go eyeball to eyeball with Russia.
Very nice. Thank you, Dr. Kim. What about you, Dr. Hamud Salhi? Do you think that China is prepared to provide further economic and financial support for Russia as it faces sanctions? Will China not face sanctions from the West itself if it provides such support?
Well, the Chinese have been clear. Sanctions that are directed at them will not be tolerated. They will respond accordingly, and they are firm on that position. What we have seen up to this point is the latest media report in the Chinese, and one way to look at the government position is how the media respond to the current crisis. It is clear that the Chinese are very cautious, are looking at this situation from their own perspective, that their national interest is at stake as well, and they will do what they can to maintain that strategic interest. What China wants is a stable international economic system, a system that will favor them. Now, in terms of supporting the Russian, they have been very clear that they will do what's best for them, and they will continue to take that path, meaning that engage with the Russians as long as it doesn't affect the relationship with the West, because they are trying to, as they say, eat their cake and have their cake and eat it too, meaning that they are taking this issue from both ends. They want a role in the economic sphere, in the global economy, and they are concerned at the same time by how far these sanctions are moving. At the end, attacks on their economic interests, boycotting through either secondary sanctions regimes or directly, will not be seen favorably by the Chinese. As far as the global economy going into inflation and what Summers said, it's very clear that Summers have always had this position of him taking that different side. I'm not sure I would sort of agree with his depiction of the international economic system, or for that matter, how he sees inflation. Certainly, he's a very well-respected economist, but to the extent that going further and deeper in this path will have a big impact on the consumer's ability to purchase And as we have seen so far, oil prices and the pump are being a very, very important factor in how
and further consequences are yet to be followed or witnessed on the ground concretely. Now, European Union leaders are meeting for an informal summit at the Palace of Versailles near Paris, intended to lay the foundations for a more sovereign Europe. At the summit, European leaders dosed Ukraine's hope of quickly gaining EU membership. Nabil Khazini has this report.
The European flag is unfurled again under the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. This was on the occasion of the European Union summit in Versailles, where Europe's approach to the crisis in Ukraine dominated the first day of the talks.
We are more united than ever, and never seen the member states being so united, and together with our transatlantic partners.
The French President Emmanuel Macron hosted EU leaders for an informal summit aimed at laying the foundations for a more sovereign Europe.
This is a defining moment for Europe, and it is a moment where we see that Putin's war is also a question of the resilience of democracies.
But on the round table, they differed over Ukraine's appeal for a rapid accession to the bloc.
But I think it's also important to show a clear, open door for EU membership for Ukraine, that the path is open for them to take.
Yet the door should not be open for a country at war, nor could it be closed, says Emmanuel Macron.
Can we open a membership procedure with a country at war? I don't think so. Can we shut the door and say never? It would be unfair. Can we forget about the balance points in that region? Let's be cautious.
On the other hand, some EU leaders pushed for tougher sanctions that would hit Russia's oil and gas industries, despite the EU importing about 40% of its natural gas from Russia.
And to this, ladies and gentlemen, our talk show comes to a close. We wished we could discuss further Dr. Hamud Salhi and Dr. Kim Farquham. Thank you so much for your interest and insights. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, our talk show comes to a close. Thank you for keeping it here on All 24 News. That's it for me, and bye for now.